Hello my friends and welcome to today's video. I'm Jeanette with Vivo Vintage Designs. In today's video I am going to show you how to create this painting using watercolor, and then we'll use some Micron pens to create this pattern in the painting. So I did do this kind of dark because I wanted you to be able to see it, but now that it is on the paper and you've seen it, I am going to take my kneaded eraser and I am just going to roll it over the paper to remove some of those lines, well, just to lighten them. I need to be able to see them, but I need them to be lighter because even though I'm going to trace them with a Micron pen, I still don't want them to be noticeable. So by just rolling my kneaded eraser over the paper, you can see that it lightens the lines and it doesn't damage the paper. Sometimes if you rub your eraser, if I were to scrub the paper like this with the eraser, it can cause some damage to the paper. And then when you paint over it, the paint just doesn't apply in the same way as it would had you not damaged the paper. That's just the way I like to do it. Now, to go over my supply list with you, I am using Arches watercolor paper. And for this type of technique, even for the beginner, I say this all the time, it's better to use good quality paper than to use inexpensive paper. I know that Arches watercolor 100% cotton cold press paper is more expensive than the cheaper brands that most beginners like to work with. And I understand it's a matter of budget. It's a matter of you're just learning. You don't want to waste the paper. But if you take a full sheet, buy a large pad and take your sheets, cut them in quarters and halves. And that way you don't feel like you're wasting the paper because you're a beginner. But I mean, you can practice on less expensive paper. But then when you're ready to make a painting that is frame worthy, you will want to use better quality paper. And I tell you this because as a beginner, the first paper I bought was Canson. And it was, I mean, I practiced on it and I learned a lot of things on it. But the big difference was when I started using better quality paper, the quality of my paintings was much better. So buy yourself at least one pad, cut the sheets, and you'll see the difference in your paintings. It really does make a difference. Okay, and I am going to be using my silver black velvet 1.5 inch wash brush. I have a size 4 silver black velvet brush and a size 8. I also have my Schmincke pan paints, but of course use whatever you have. So the first thing I want to do is, because I have a picture in my mind of how I want this painting to turn out. So I want to do a wash. I want to add some blue. I want this to be, the background to be kind of like the sky. And then I am going to, while the paper is wet, we're going to work wet and wet. We're going to drop some different greens in these leaves. So first thing we're going to do is get our brush nice and wet, and we're going to start wetting down our paper. And when you do this, you want the water to sit on the paper for a bit because you want it to be absorbed. That way your paper stays wet longer. And you want to make sure that you get the paper to a glistening stage. You don't want it sopping wet. You don't want any puddles, but you do want it to be consistent throughout the entire area. So go over it a few times. Make sure you have the entire area evenly coated with the water and give it a moment to soak in. And I can see that my paper is really soaking this in quickly, which is nice. So I'm just going to go over one last time. And again, making sure that I don't have any puddles, that the paper is just glistening. And then I'm just going to let it sit for a moment. Now I'm just making sure that I have even coverage. I'm going to let it sit for a moment. And in that time, I'm going to mix my blues, and I happen to have some on my palette already, so I'm just going to use a little water to dilute those colors because they're really an intense blue and I don't want it that bright. So I'm just going to lighten it up, and I'm not even sure which blue it is that I have on my palette. It was paint that was left over from a previous painting. Okay, so now I'm just going to drop this color in, and it's okay if it goes over my lines because I want that look. So I'm going to just put down all around my painting where there is sky. I'm going to try and skip over the stems where I can, but because the paper is wet, the paint is going to spread wherever it wants to. So again, I want that little, that kind of effect where the blue runs into the greens, and when I start putting down the greens, they're going to run into the blue, and the detail will come when we outline all these leaves and create the detail that way. So you can see that because the paper is wet, the paint flows very smoothly and you don't have any hard edges. And if you're using a lesser quality paper, you have to work very quickly because they have a tendency to dry much quicker than better paper. So now I'm going to intensify the color, the blue, a little bit in certain areas. So I'm just picking up a heavier consistency of that blue and dropping it in here and there. And the more your paper dries, the less your paint will move. So keep that in mind. If you don't want it to be blurry like this, just give your paper a little time to dry, and then as you drop in your paint, your blue for the sky, it will move less and spread less on the paper. Okay, now we have to mix some greens. So I'm just going to use a few different greens from my palette. I have May green, cobalt green, perylene green, and I may even drop in some blues in there. Let's see how it goes. All right, let me just activate my colors. I may even throw in some, let's see, maybe some burnt sienna. So I've activated my colors and I'm just going to drop them in here and there. And if you find your paper's drying too quickly, just give it a squirt with some water and it'll move those colors for you. So you can see I'm not trying to be too careful of where I put my colors. I'm just putting them down and letting the water color do its thing and soften those edges. I just want to make sure that I have different greens in my leaves, and I'm okay with it spreading into another leaf, and I'm going to continue doing that. And I'm using the smaller brush for this because I want to pay attention to where my paint is going. I want to have a little bit more control over it. So you can see just dropping in the color is very simple to do. And again, if you find your paper is drying too quickly for you, just add a little bit of water, a little squirt of water, and you may get some nice blooms in the background, which is a really nice effect also, especially in this type of painting. And I'm using a lot of this lighter green. This is called May green because I like the contrast between that and the blue of the sky. But I am dropping in some darker colors just for contrast. And if you find that some areas have too much water, just use your paper towel, the tip of your paper towel, to pick up some of that moisture. You can also use your brush, dry it off on the paper towel, and just lift off some of that pigment and moisture from your paper. Watercolor dries a lot lighter than when you put it on the paper, so keep that in mind also as you're adding your colors into these leaves. And now I'm going to add my darkest green, which is the perylene green. I'm going to use that for my stems. And of course the paper is still really wet, so the color is going to bleed out, and I like that. And you should really use a small brush for this. And if you don't want them to bleed out that much, to blend so much into the rest of the colors that you have on your paper, give it a moment to dry, and that will work in not having your colors spread so far. And if you have blooms like this, which occur when you lift your brush, but this is a really loose painting, very simple. There's nothing you can possibly do wrong to ruin this painting. Okay, so I'm going to let this dry for now, and then we'll be back in just a moment and we'll add some more. Let me just add a little bit of this green right here. And I realized that I missed this one completely, so I'm going to add a little bit of color here. Okay, so now we're going to let this dry. And if you like, for some really interesting effects, what we can do is, I think I'm going to add a little bit of salt to this. Let me just move this color a little bit. I'm just adding a little bit of water because it dried, and I don't want really any white areas of the paper showing. Just want to blend that in a little bit. So you can take a little bit of table salt, and I'm just using regular table salt, and I'm going to add a little bit like in the sky area, just to create a little interesting effect. It almost looks like rain or snow, but the paper must be a little bit wet, not too wet, just a little wet for it to work. And you have to let the paper dry naturally. You can't use a blow dryer, or you can, but it won't work as well. So I suggest you let this dry on its own. And now we wait. So go pour yourself a cup of tea, a cup of coffee, a glass of wine, whatever you like. Just let this dry naturally. Okay, so our painting is dry now, and you can see the effects that the salt has caused on the background. It's a really nice effect. If you haven't tried it before, you should really give it a try. So now we want to brush off that salt that remains on there. I'm going to run my hand over lightly just to make sure that I get it all. Okay, I think I got it all. All right, so now I have, these are not Micron pens, but they're the same thing. They're journaling pens. They're by EK Tools, and I have a 0.35 and a 0.25. So I'm going to use the one with the thicker nib to outline my leaves here. So I'm just going to start outlining them. And it's a little hard to see the pencil lines now because I lightened them so much. So I'm going to keep my reference photo nearby so that I can better follow the lines. And again, I'm just outlining them with this thicker nib. I will use the smaller nib to create the veins within the petals. Rather, leaves. I don't know why I always say that.